Order, order! Mr. Speaker.
Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. I would like to table a report from the Provincial Auditor of Saskatchewan, pursuant to Section 14.1 of the Provincial Auditor Act. The Provincial Auditor has submitted her business and financial plan for the year ended March 31st, 2024. Introduction of guests. I recognize the Premier.
Here, here. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for leave for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues for the granting of the extended introduction. Mr. Speaker, through you and to all members of this Assembly, I would like to introduce a number of people, but starting with two individuals that really need no introduction in this Assembly, and that is Tammy Wall and her husband, Brad. Here, here. Mr. Speaker, as we know, these two are in town today for an important occasion in the life of our province, the province of Saskatchewan, and I would hope also an important day in the life of the Wall family. Later this afternoon in the Rotunda, we are going to unveil Premier Wall's official portrait, a portrait that will join the other portraits of past premiers on permanent display in the Saskatchewan Gallery here at the Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, the painting was completed by Mr. Phil Richards, one of Canada's most renowned portrait painters. Brad posed for the painting early in his time as Premier, and that is keeping with tradition for a number of reasons, Mr. Speaker. But it is prudent to pose at the beginning of your tenure as Premier before the challenges of the job mount over years and the worry lines do tend to deepen. Mr. Speaker, we've been fortunate in Saskatchewan to have premiers who have transcended provincial politics and have really become national leaders. And that's true on premiers from both sides of the Assembly over the course of our history. Mr. Speaker, it's no doubt that Brad Wall, during his time as Premier, he commanded the respect of within this province, but also on the national stage, and I would say even far beyond our national borders around the world. Brad Wall served as the leader of the Saskatchewan Party for nearly 14 years, and he was Premier for a decade and a little bit, Mr. Speaker. He was the face of our government, he was the face of our party, and more critically, I would say that for over a decade, he was the face of the province of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, Brad had a clear vision for the province when he was elected Premier late in 2007. He believed that we were only scratching the surface of Saskatchewan's enormous potential, and that has proved to be true. He was certain Saskatchewan could become an economic leader, a place of opportunity, particularly for our young people that were coming, Mr. Speaker, but that already resided here. And more than that, he believed that our province could serve as a beacon of hope for people from around the world to move to this place. Mr. Speaker, in many ways, Brad Wall's vision has been realized in this province that we all love. Under Brad Wall's leadership in Saskatchewan, we've seen our population soar by more than 160,000 people. During his time as leader since 2007, investment has flowed into the province like it has never before, responding to a competitive business environment put in place, I would say, under this gentleman's government. Mr. Speaker, under Brad Wall in this province, we built a children's hospital in the city of Saskatoon. There was new long-term care facilities that were constructed in communities right across Saskatchewan. There was more doctors, there was more teachers, there was more nurses that were hired, Mr. Speaker, thousands of them literally. There was billions of dollars that were invested into our public provincial infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that young people would start their careers and ultimately build their lives in a community in Saskatchewan. Our government created the most generous graduate retention program in Canada, Mr. Speaker. That was under, again, this gentleman's leadership, Mr. Speaker. That all happened under the leadership and careful guidance of one Premier Brad Wall. Mr. Speaker, our former Premier served in office in a manner that endeared him to the people of this province as well. From sharing his favourite song on Twitter, often something from Waylon Jennings, to calling into the green zone with a number of predictions. He always seemed to pick the Raiders in the NFL predictions for some reason, Mr. Speaker. He also was known to call out jackwagons who might be doing something ridiculous from time to time. He most certainly, Brad Wall was most certainly in touch with the heartbeat of Saskatchewan people. Mr. Speaker, I want to end this introduction by noting a small but important change that Brad brought to this House that we all follow now. For a long time, it was customary in this Assembly to introduce guests by welcoming them to the Legislative Assembly. It was Brad Wall that, when he was first elected, he started to welcome guests into their Legislative Assembly. And now that one word, it may not seem like a very large difference, it's just a word. But as Mark Twain said, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between a lightning bolt and a lightning bug. Mr. Speaker, it is significant. The suggests that we are welcoming guests into our House, Mr. Speaker, and that is not the case. There means this House belongs to them, which it does, and visitors in this Assembly should feel very at home in their Assembly. Brad started doing that, and it wasn't long before members on both sides of the House had taken up that tradition, and it carries through to this day. We all now today welcome visitors to their Legislative Assembly, and Mr. Speaker, it is a true honour for me today to welcome Brad and Tammy Wall to their Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, while I'm on my feet, I wanted to welcome everyone that has joined us here today on, as I said, this important day in Saskatchewan's history, Mr. Speaker. But I wanted to make special mention of two founding members of the Saskatchewan Party. We have seated beside Brad Dan D'Autremont, Ken Kravetz, and beside Ken is his lovely wife, Gail. Mr. Speaker, behind these two gentlemen and this fine lady is Rob Norris, who also served on the floor of this Assembly in multiple files. And behind me at the back here, Mr. Speaker, a colleague of many of us on the floor and a sparring partner of many across the way, Mr. Speaker, as was Mr. Kevin Doherty. Mr. Speaker, I again would like all members to welcome these folks to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my honour to join with the Premier in welcoming Brad and Tammy Wall to their Legislative Assembly. It is a pleasure to see you, former Premier, up in that gallery, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps a little more of a pleasure than it was sometimes to see you across the aisle here. If it wasn't evident to everyone here when they walked into the rotunda today that this was a special day, it certainly is evident when we look up at that gallery. And I didn't check the parking lot to see if the 73 Caddy is out there, but that would have been, Mr. Speaker, a further clue that something was going on here today. I want to say sincerely thank you for your service to this province. And the Premier stole my joke about the importance of sitting for that portrait at the start of a term, because leadership, and I think our roles here, can be tough on us, but also tough on our families. So I want to say thank you to Tammy as well, because as has been often said here, but maybe not said enough, none of us serve here on our own, and that support is critical. I said that the Premier stole my joke. He also taught me something today, so I will give him credit for that. I did not know, Premier Wall, that you were the one who started the tradition of welcoming people to their Legislative Assembly. But I think that is very important for all of us to remember, that we all serve here not only with the support of our families, but we serve the people of this province. And I think that is a very fine legacy to have left, a fine tradition to have left this Assembly. I want to also join the Premier in welcoming those former MLAs here again to their Legislative Assembly. MLA Kravitz, Norris, D'Outremont, Doherty, former MLA Doherty across the way, who I do hear your voice often on the scoop, but good to see you here in this Legislative Assembly. And I want to say it is a pleasure to welcome all of you. It is also sometimes, I think, good for us to know that there are some things that a scrappy opposition can get up, small opposition can get up to in this province. So I want to thank you for providing that example as well. Mr. Speaker, again, it is my honor to welcome the former Premier here and invite and welcome all of these guests on behalf of the official opposition. Welcome to your Legislative Assembly.
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's indeed an honour today to stand and ask to you, or through you and through you to all members of the Assembly, to welcome 34 fabulous students from the Humboldt Collegiate Institute to their Legislative Assembly. And they're accompanied today by someone who comes here at least twice a year, and that's one of their teachers, David Miat, and along with an additional teacher, David Rowe, who has also been here a few times now too. I truly hope that you enjoy the proceedings. I can't say enough about Humboldt Collegiate. It's a fabulous school and a fabulous community. So welcome to your Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member from Melfort.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I would like to welcome to his legislature Pepito Escanlar. He is currently the honorary consul for the Philippines to Saskatchewan, and that appointment was made in April. Pete could be known as Pete, Peter, or Pepito, and it was interesting. We were downstairs probably a year ago looking at the portraits of the different premiers, and he's a bit of an artist himself with many pieces throughout the city, and he was able to tell me who the artists were that had painted the past premiers. So he's please join with me in welcoming Pepito Escanlar to his Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you and to all members, I'd like to welcome and introduce 3 guests in the West Gallery. They are all mentees from the Canadian Western Agribition Ag Mentorship Program. Mr. Speaker, these leaders of tomorrow help promote and strengthen agriculture in our province. I would like to welcome them and ask them to give a wave. Sandra Hestorfer from St. Benedict, Brooke Dudley from Lockwood, and Renee Lear from Melville. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to welcome these guests to their Legislative Assembly. Hear, hear.
Recognize a member from Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to join briefly with the Ag Minister to introduce these leaders and join in the welcome of these leaders in their Assembly. Thank you so very much for all your leadership in agriculture. It's a pleasure to have you here in the Assembly. It's wonderful to have you here in Regina while Agribition is on the best beef show on the continent, Mr. Speaker, and the largest in Canada, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much for your leadership in this very important sector.
Presenting petitions, I recognize a member from Saskatoon Centre.
Miigwech, Mr. Speaker. The folks who signed this petition wish to bring to your attention the following. Trap lines in the north are disappearing. Users of these lands are not being consulted by industry and this government. This government has been auctioning off Crown land and leases to the highest bidder. The first right of refusal must be granted to First Nations involved in the treaty land entitlement process when Crown lands are being sold. This government is breaching the constitutionally protected treaties. This government has not taken constitutionally protected treaty rights seriously, and constitutionally protected treaty rights limits the province's legal authority over First Nation and Métis treaty rights in this province. Taxpayers in this province are footing the bill for this government's mistakes and losses in courts. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call the Government of Saskatchewan to immediately stop the sell-off of Crown land and work with First Nation and Métis communities to develop a new duty to consult framework. The folks who signed this petition reside in Quinton and Raymore. I do so present.
Recognize the member for Moosomin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We, the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan, wish to bring to your attention the following. That the Liberal NDP federal government continues to infringe on the constitutional rights of the province of Saskatchewan and implement policies that are detrimental to our province's economic well-being. That the commitments and actions of the federal government have made the control of Saskatchewan's resources and rights unclear. That an unsupportive federal government will continue to impede Saskatchewan's potential to play a global role in providing resources to world markets. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action. To call upon the Government of Saskatchewan to implement Saskatchewan First policies and legislation that will support the development of Saskatchewan as a global supplier of food, fuel, and fertilizer without federal infringement on Saskatchewan's constitutional authority. This is signed by residents of Wynyard and Wadena. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm on my feet again to present a petition to the Government of Saskatchewan to fix the rural healthcare staffing crisis. Those who signed the petition today would like to bring to your attention that recruitment and retention of healthcare professionals is a particular issue in Saskatchewan's rural healthcare facilities, leading to disruptions and shutdowns in emergency rooms, acute care, labs, and X-ray services. Healthcare workers and their families are valuable assets in Saskatchewan communities and local economies. Unfortunately, many of them are burning out due to the stresses on the job. They're leaving the profession, and many are looking to leave this province. I'll read the prayer, Mr. Speaker. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to fix the rural healthcare staffing crisis. This petition today is signed by another 10 people from Wilkie, Saskatchewan. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present our petition calling on the Government of Saskatchewan to cancel its plans to end its relationship with Luther Heights in Saskatoon. The undersigned residents would like to bring the following to our attention. The Department of Social Services is cancelling the government subsidy for 50 apartments in Luther Heights, a seniors' residence in Saskatoon. This building contains 120 units providing vital housing for seniors. The decision to eliminate these subsidies reduces the supply of affordable housing to seniors on fixed incomes and creates a burden and stress on us all. I had the pleasure of door-knocking in Luther Heights on a number of occasions as it resides in my riding of Saskatoon-Meewasin. This was the biggest concern raised by residents. Mr. Speaker, this isn't an isolated incident. Seniors in my riding and across Saskatchewan are being forced to choose between paying more or leaving their homes and communities. This is not how seniors who have contributed so much to our country should be treated. We urge the government to reconsider and renew their partnership with Luther Heights. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully call on the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan to urge the Government of Saskatchewan to reverse the decision to eliminate subsidized housing and restore funding for the 50 units affected at Luther Heights. Mr. Speaker, the signatories today reside in Saskatoon. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise again today to present a petition to the Legislative Assembly calling for the funding of in vitro fertilization treatment here in Saskatchewan. You know, Mr. Speaker, I was out the other evening and had a woman come up to me and say how much it means to her to have this petition presented because despite having a good paying job and her husband having a good paying job, both with benefits, how crippling the economic stress was for them trying to afford a family. And you know, Mr. Speaker, for a government whose books are doing so well, it behooves them to consider supporting people who are desperately trying to afford a family. Mr. Speaker, a health condition for some should not be a business opportunity for others. I will read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Government of Saskatchewan immediately move to cover the financial burden of 2 rounds of IVF treatment for Saskatchewan people experiencing infertility. The signatories of this petition today, Mr. Speaker, are from Wilkie and Unity. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling on the government to stop the closure of public liquor stores. Those who signed this petition wish to bring to our attention the following. The recent decision to shutter the 34 remaining public liquor stores across Saskatchewan will see the loss of 350 good-paying, stable jobs. Shame. Public liquor stores have remained profitable and self-sufficient while providing good-paying, stable employment to 350 Saskatchewan residents, despite the competition of private for-profit liquor stores. And revenue generated by public liquor stores helps to fund crucial public services such as healthcare, education, and highways. I'd like to read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to immediately reverse the decision to close the remaining 34 public SLGA liquor stores. Those who signed the petition today come from Regina. I do so present. Hear, hear.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to continue presenting our petition calling for the Government of Saskatchewan to introduce and pass paid sick leave legislation. The undersigned residents would like to bring to our attention the following: that a healthy workforce is good for the economy, that lives could be saved if workers could afford to stay home when they're sick, that no one should have to make the choice between going to work sick or risking the roof over their head by staying home, that workers, doctors, and public health officials continue to call for paid sick leave in Saskatchewan, and that the official opposition has twice now introduced paid sick leave legislation since the onset of the pandemic, calling for a minimum of 10 paid sick days each year and 14 days during a public health crisis, a bill that this party, the Sask Party government, has voted down unanimously. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to finally introduce and pass paid sick leave legislation. Mr. Speaker, the people who have signed the petition today reside in Paddockwood and Prince Albert. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions, statements by members. I recognize a member from Kelvington-Wadena.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize the 150 firefighters from across Saskatchewan who attended the 2022 Saskatchewan Volunteer Firefighters Association Fall Fire School. The Wynyard Fire Department hosted the event from September 30th to October 2nd at the Wynyard Curling Rink. Firefighters practiced as the rapid intervention team, where the objective is to have a fully equipped rescue team on the scene and in ready state to deploy and rescue injured and trapped firefighters. Vehicles simulating car crashes were set up behind the Wynyard Fire Hall. They provided training on how cutting cars apart given various situations, how to break glass properly, block for safety, getting people out of vehicles, and related skills. At the fire hall, firefighters had the opportunity to familiarize themselves with self-contained breathing apparatus and learn more about pump operations, fire engine protocols, hydrants, and other valuable equipment. Additional training took place outside of town with vehicles set on fire, where participants received training on how to extinguish the fire properly. Some basic fire training also took place at the high school. I want to take this time to thank all our volunteer firefighters and the town of Wynyard for hosting this important event. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is a Canada-wide National Day of Action for Early Learning and Child Care. Today and every day is an opportunity to recognize the absolutely invaluable work that our early childhood educators and childcare staff do across this province. It's also a day to acknowledge that quality, affordable childcare cannot happen without quality educators, good working conditions, and proper compensation. Early childhood education is the foundation for a good start in life. Early childhood educators and childcare staff are invested in the growth and development of our young children. It is important to take the time to properly thank them, thank those who dedicate their lives to their care and education. Despite signing the National Child Care Plan nearly 2 years ago, access to childcare remains a challenge and costs remain a barrier. We still don't adequately compensate our educators, Mr. Speaker. Across Canada, $19.20 an hour is the median wage for a child care educator. Meanwhile, many still earn minimum wage or just above that. Unbelievable, Mr. Speaker. This government needs to address inadequate wages and commit to developing a child care system that all citizens in this province can access. Let's end the patchwork approach and embrace transformational change. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join with me in congratulating these important professionals for the incredible work they do for our next generation and to commit to doing better by them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon, Riversdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's another great day in Riversdale, advancing patient care in our province. Since September, the Da Vinci surgical robot has performed more than 24 surgeries at St. Paul's Hospital in Saskatoon, which marks the successful launch of our province's first robotic surgical program. Saskatchewan patients benefit from a new state-of-the-art robotic-assisted surgical system that contributes to less pain and faster recovery. The purchase of the $2.5 million Da Vinci surgical system marks the completion of St. Paul's Hospital Foundation campaign program. The St. Paul's Foundation raised $1.5 million for the surgical robot, including a $1.1 million gift from Merlis Belcher family. The robotic is called Daryl in honor of Merlis Belcher's late son. Mr. Speaker, our government provided $1 million to help purchase the Da Vinci surgical system. We have also committed to covering annual operational expenses estimated at $160,000 in the first year and increasing to about $800,000 by year 5. Mr. Speaker, we would like to thank Dr. Mendez, Dr. Bathini, and everyone involved in coordinating the training and implementation of the surgical robot. I now ask all members in the Assembly to thank everyone who helped launch this program in our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Centre.
Miigwech, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to recognize the FSIN and the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, FSIN and Métis Nation of Saskatchewan called out this government on its Sask First Act that ignores the inherent treaty and constitutionally protected treaty rights of First Nation and Métis peoples in this province. Chief Cameron states, quote, "The blatant disrespect that this province continues to display is unbelievable. First Nations see the Natural Resource Transfer Agreement 1930 as an ongoing infringement on our inherent treaty and constitutional rights." End quote. And the Métis Nation President McCallum states, quote, "Métis in Saskatchewan and our government want to see Saskatchewan prosper, but it cannot be achieved through the denial of our inherent rights." End quote. Mr. Speaker, as the critic for First Nation and Métis relations, I am pleased to see Indigenous organizations such as FSIN and the Métis Nation standing up for their constitutionally protected treaty rights and for speaking out against this political posturing of the Sask Party regarding the Sask First Act. I invite all members to join me in thanking FSIN and the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. Miigwech.
Recognize a member from the Battlefield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's an honour to rise in the House to commemorate the 55th anniversary of Battleford's Trade and Education Centre, or BTEC as we know it. BTEC runs a day program working with individuals experiencing disabilities and assisting them in pursuing independence and quality of life. Now, since its incorporation in 1967, BTEC has moved around to a few different buildings in town before settling in the beautiful 20,000 square foot Pfeiffer Learning Centre, which opened back in 2016. This last year, BTEC added a snoozle and sensory room, thanks to the generous contributions of local families and organizations. Now, I've had the opportunity to visit BTEC a couple of times, and I can say that it is a place where people are known, treated with respect, and offered a level of dignity that is unmatched. But if you're going to visit, Mr. Speaker, I suggest planning your visit on a Friday so that you can participate in the weekly karaoke session. Lots of fun is had by all on those days. Mr. Speaker, as the MLA for the Battlefords, I want to thank the BTEC staff for the work they do each and every day, serving our community, our region, and our province. And I ask all members to join me in congratulating Battleford's Trade and Education Centre, their clients, and their staff on a happy 55th anniversary.
Recognize a member from Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise and speak today about a great research centre located here in our Queen City. The Petroleum Technology Research Centre is a not-for-profit corporation founded in 1998 to facilitate research to reduce the carbon footprint and increase the production of energy. Mr. Speaker, PTRC strives to support industry, governments, and research providers to realize their environmental, social, and governance needs. Their vision is to be the leader in research and innovation to develop sustainable and environmentally responsible energy. The PTRC has fostered the expansion of research capacity in Saskatchewan and Canada through funding and facilitating projects that are important to addressing the challenges faced by the energy industry. One of their primary projects is Equistore. This is an ongoing CO2 measurement, monitoring, and verification project to demonstrate that storing carbon dioxide deep underground in a brine and sandstone water formation is a safe, workable solution to reduce greenhouse gases. Mr. Speaker, Equistore is injecting and storing CO2 from SaskPower's Boundary Dam carbon capture facility near Estevan, Saskatchewan. This is another great example of Saskatchewan's innovation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Wood River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Great news coming out of Wood River constituency. We recently hired 2 new physicians, Dr. Palusai and Dr. Lashkari. Dr. Palusai has been practicing since 2004. His wife and 2 children, an 8-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter, join us from Coquitlam, British Columbia, and have just enrolled their son in the Assiniboia School. Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Dr. Palusai is also a physician looking to obtain her accreditation from the Saskatchewan International Physician Practice Assessment Program, or SIPA. I wish her all the best in doing so. Dr. Lashkari and his wife joined us from Montreal, Quebec, and found residence in Assiniboia. Dr. Lashkari has been practicing since 2000 and entered the SIPA program from June to September. Both doctors come from Iran. Adding these new physicians will help improve the quality of life for the constituents of Wood River. We are lucky for these physicians and their families chose Wood River constituency and the province of Saskatchewan for their new home. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me and thank Drs. Palusai and Dr. Lashkari for their contributions they and their families will add to the health and cultural fabric of Wood River constituency and our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday's mid-year update should have been good news. Revenues are up $2.4 billion from budget, up $50 million from the first quarter. And that's even after those Meewasin by-election checks went out the door. What's confusing, though, Mr. Speaker, is why the Premier is actually choosing to make life more expensive in our province during an affordability crisis, no less, Mr. Speaker. Why won't that Premier provide some relief and use a fraction of those windfall revenues to scrap his latest round of fee, tax and utility hikes, Mr. Speaker? The question is, will he show the leadership that's needed and commit to that today?
Recognize the Premier.
I would agree. Yesterday was a good day at the second quarter update here in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, where our finances held steady from our first quarter report, Mr. Speaker. Saskatchewan, we're pleased to continue to have the second highest credit rating among provinces in the nation of Canada, the second lowest net debt to GDP, Mr. Speaker, of any province in the nation of Canada. Most certainly, Mr. Speaker, what yesterday confirmed is the inflationary pressures initiatives that the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Premier, had came forward with at the end of August, Mr. Speaker, that are going to help small business and community after community across this province to the tune of just under $100 million. Mr. Speaker, the ongoing interest savings by paying down $1 billion in debt in the province, Mr. Speaker, and the $450 million that was allocated to put out the Saskatchewan tax affordability credit checks to each and every individual over the age of 18, Mr. Speaker, are going to help address some of the inflationary pressures that we're experiencing in this province, Mr. Speaker, and Canadians are experiencing across the nation, Mr. Speaker, and it's only through the strength of our economy that we are able to make those kinds of investments in Saskatchewan people, in Saskatchewan families, in communities right across the province of Saskatchewan.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
A good day for who, Mr. Speaker? That government is sitting on windfall revenue while people in this province continue to struggle. But frankly, it's no surprise from that tax and squander Sask Party government. They've hiked the PST from 5% to 6%. They brought back PST to children's clothing, restaurant meals, and insurance, construction labor, Mr. Speaker, and even taxing people over and over again on used vehicles. And this year, sitting on that revenue, the Premier has also added PST to sporting events, concerts, movies, fairs, golf, curling, rodeos, and, Mr. Speaker, even the agribition. Since 2016, the average household in this province is paying an additional $890 in PST alone. Wow. Will that Premier stop digging into people's pockets and scrap his hikes today?
Recognize the Premier.
Saskatchewan people know that they are not today paying 9% PST like they did under the Mr. Speaker, this is Mr. Speaker, this most certainly, again, I'm going to say this just like I did yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the affordability plan that came forward in the end of August by the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Premier, Mr. Speaker, was put out to the people of Saskatchewan. Yesterday's mid-year update confirms that we most certainly are going to be able to carry through with that plan, Mr. Speaker, and still balance the budget here in the province of Saskatchewan. It's an affordability plan that has been questioned by the members opposite, Mr. Speaker, but when it came to the floor of the Assembly, they voted for it, Mr. Speaker. The same in ensuring that we have that strength in our resource-based economy looking forward. It's this government that has introduced the Saskatchewan First Act, Mr. Speaker. The members opposite have brought forward fair criticisms on that act, Mr. Speaker, but when it comes to the floor of the Assembly, they most certainly vote for it, Mr. Speaker. When we bring forward initiatives to keep our communities and our families safe right across this province and in adding police officers, Mr. Speaker, take on the federal government with their federal gun ban, Mr. Speaker. There's complaints that come from the members opposite, but when it comes to the floor of the Legislative Assembly, they vote for it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're going to hear complaints for the next couple of years, but when we get to the polls, I think you're going to see the members opposite likely go out, and there's a good chance they might vote for us then too, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I have a piece of advice that premiers should spend less time listening to that House Leader and more time listening to the people of this province. Mr. Speaker, this province province has a lot to offer. Make no mistake, even a heck of a lot to offer. But sadly, timely access to health care is not one of them. Mr. Speaker, we have the fewest family doctors per capita in the whole country. Shame. 3 times as many people are waiting for surgery than 7 years ago. Shame. Mr. Speaker, that's 36,000 people. And 1 in 4 of those people have been waiting for over a year. Wow. Countless promises have been made by this government, but it's worse than ever. What might the Premier offer to those 36,000 Saskatchewan people currently waiting for surgery?
Recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm appreciative of the question because there's some data that has been out on the Twitter sphere, Mr. Speaker, and social media circles, which can't always be reliable, Mr. Speaker, but there's some data being Mr. Speaker, there's some data released by Kai-Hi, Mr. Speaker. That data is done and is brought together by surveys that are conducted by Kai-Hi, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the number of physicians in this province. Mr. Speaker, we prefer to get our data from the College of Physicians and Surgeons. Those are the folks that actually take the data from the Saskatchewan Health Authority, and I'm pleased to say that this past year there's been an increase of 107 physicians across the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, 51 family physicians, 56 specialists working in our healthcare system. Over 1,000 physicians, Mr. Speaker, are working in our healthcare facilities since Brad Wall formed government, Mr. Speaker, in 2007. You add to that 5,000 nurses. Mr. Speaker, there's more work to do in this space, Mr. Speaker. That's why today our Minister of Health is on the ground in the Philippines recruiting nurses, recruiting LPNs, recruiting CCAs, recruiting healthcare professionals to come back work in our facilities to support our frontline healthcare workers, Mr. Speaker, and ensure that we can move forward to ensure the investments that we are making in our surgical wait time initiatives, Mr. Speaker, those investments both in the public surgical system as well as the private surgeries that are being performed within the public system, Mr. Speaker. Another initiative brought in under the former Premier, Mr. Speaker, are showing results for Saskatchewan people that are waiting for surgeries right across this province.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, those clips may play well for that Premier on social media, but frankly, they do nothing for the 36,000 people in this province who are waiting for surgery. Between the federal and provincial governments, more than 100 million, Mr. Speaker, was set aside to reduce surgical wait times in this fiscal year. So far, we've seen no results. Today, Jolene Van Alstine and her husband Miles are with us. Jolene lives day in and day out with horrific pain and discomfort, and it's been that way for the better part of 6 years. She needs to see a specialist. Her condition can be treated, but Jolene hasn't been able to access the care and the treatment that she so desperately needs. Mr. Speaker, Jolene is 42 years old, and she shouldn't have to live this way. Does that Premier agree?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, first I would say to Jolene in particular, but also her husband Miles, if we're having some challenges, and I can't speak to a specific case here, Mr. Speaker, but having some challenges with a specific case, most certainly reach out to the Quality Care Coordinator, reach out to the Minister of Health's office, Mr. Speaker, reach out to the Minister of Health's office as well, Mr. Speaker, so we can help navigate individual situations when it comes to the accessing any health care procedure, whether it be a surgery or something else, Mr. Speaker. In these cases, it is health care providers, including our specialists, that are responsible and on the front lines of assessing patients and prioritizing various referrals that happen. But I think, in fairness, Mr. Speaker, this really does need to strengthen our resolve as a government, but our resolve as people of Saskatchewan to ensure that, yes, the $100 million additional dollars that were put into our surgical initiatives here in the province for a total of just over $600 million a year, that we see results from that investment, Mr. Speaker. And we are seeing results today. We're up 6,000 surgeries in the first 6 months of this year. Mr. Speaker, the target throughout this year is to be up 7,000 surgeries. We're on track to do that. 13,000 additional surgeries. This is over the 90,000 base surgeries we do each and every year. 13,000 more is the target next year, and 18,000 surgeries the year after. Those will be surgeries that are offered in our public system, Mr. Speaker, in our private system that is worked into the public funding system that we have, Mr. Speaker, and we most certainly need to ensure that the investments that are being made are showing results, Mr. Speaker, showing results for people just like Jolene and Moss.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, they've been down all these roads, and every one of them has led to a dead end. Jolene has a heartbreaking quality of life, living with the consequences of an unresolved parathyroid condition. She experiences incredible bone pain and irregular body temperature. Vomiting, broken bones, social isolation, and ambulance rides are a regular part of her young life. An initial surgery last year offered some relief, but things have once again worsened. She's been told to expect another 2 years to see a specialist before she even gets on a surgery wait list. Jolene's illness could easily be treated. Will the minister meet with her today?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is important that patients receive care, the care that they need and deserve in a timely fashion. Mr. Speaker, I'd be pleased to meet with Jolene and her husband, Miles, this afternoon after the proceedings here today. Mr. Speaker, I understand that Jolene has had some previous contact with our office previously on her particular case. Mr. Speaker, healthcare providers, including specialists, are responsible for assessing patients and prioritizing the referrals that are based on the assessment and condition of the patient. But, Mr. Speaker, I'd be more than willing to sit down with Jolene this afternoon to discuss her case further. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nice words for the family are fine, but what they need today is action. This all comes with an untold financial burden. $350 water bills, hundreds a month to keep their home at the needed 13 degrees in the summertime. Medical professionals have suggested that they pay for care elsewhere, offering referrals to the Mayo Clinic in the States. A procedure we well know wouldn't get reimbursed by this government and would come at a great cost. It's as if they are left choosing between dying in agony or living in poverty, the exact choices that brought about the concept of universal Medicare in the first place. Yesterday, we learned this government is sitting on an extra $2.4 billion in extra revenues. Why is this government doing nothing while people like Jolene suffer?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I said previously, I'd be willing to meet with Jolene after question period today to have a further discussion about some of the specifics of her case, which I'm just not necessarily aware of, Mr. Speaker. We know from previous experience with other cases that there is a process in place involving family physicians, specialists, referrals as to whether or not surgeries and procedures can be completed in the province or outside of the province. There's an out-of-province review process as well as part of that, Mr. Speaker, but I'm willing to speak with Jolene about everything that has been tried thus far and what some of those potential options could be, and we can follow up with the ministry and the SHA and the Medical Services branch. Mr. Speaker, as the Premier said, it's important to recognize that we are making some investments into this area to address the backlog of surgeries. It's why, Mr. Speaker, in this year's budget and in our 4-point Health Human Resources Action Plan announced earlier this summer that we are investing more dollars into some of these staff. It's why the Minister of Health right now is in the Philippines to recruit some of these professionals that can help support surgeons and other specialists who are required to help us address some of these surgical backlogs that we are facing. And as Mr. Speaker, as the Premier mentioned, we are increasing the number of surgeries we're doing this year, and we're going to continue to do that in years ahead. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. Recognize the member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, this family has been down all of these roads that the minister mentions. They need to see an endocrinologist in this province. That is what urgently needs to happen here. Jolene and Miles are done waiting. They waited years for a diagnosis, an intervention, and the waiting continues. Jolene's outlook is grim. On top of constant pain and sickness, she suffers from anxiety and depression. Jolene has seriously contemplated ending her life. Miles lives in fear each day at work that Jolene will die by suicide to end the horror and suffering that she wakes up to every day. This is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Failed promises and pet projects of this government have wasted time and resources and have failed people like Jolene. What will the minister do to make sure that people who are in this situation can get the care they need?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will meet with Jolene after question period, and we'll have a further discussion about the current status of her case. Mr. Speaker, again, this is why we're committed to reducing the backlog of surgeries in this province and making sure that we're maximizing and optimizing the operating room times throughout Saskatchewan in all of our centres that are capable to do so. Mr. Speaker, it's why we're enhancing some of these initiatives when it comes to recruitment and retention of healthcare providers in this province, and adding more training seats, Mr. Speaker, so that we can be training more professionals, adding more capacity to the healthcare system. Mr. Speaker, there's a very complex system when it comes to referrals necessary for patients and the care they need. But again, Mr. Speaker, I'd be willing to meet with Jolene this afternoon and have a discussion about her current case. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is a National Day of Action for Early Learning and Childcare, and we were earlier joined in this House by providers from across the province. Thanks to the $1.1 billion federal dollars as part of the National Childcare Plan, the cost of some parents has dropped. But Saskatchewan remains an outlier in Canada, Mr. Speaker. Any parent who has attempted to find a childcare space knows these challenges all too well. And despite reductions, childcare remains one of the greatest financial costs for Saskatchewan families during a generational cost of living crisis. This means that too many Saskatchewan children go without the good start that they deserve in life. What is the minister doing to ensure greater access to affordable, high-quality childcare for Saskatchewan families? How many new spaces have been created, ones that can be staffed? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in part to the agreement that we have with the federal government, Mr. Speaker, we have in this budget $309.6 million dedicated towards childcare and early childhood development, Mr. Speaker. Under this agreement, since August of 2021, we've allocated 3,402 new childcare spaces in 59 communities, Mr. Speaker. We are now funding 10,572 childcare spaces, Mr. Speaker, a 114% increase since 2007. Mr. Speaker, the member's right. We have seen a significant reduction in childcare fees. In fact, we're at a 70% reduction from where we were before the agreement was signed, Mr. Speaker. I believe that is the largest reduction of any province that has signed an agreement with the federal government, Mr. Speaker. And just last week, I was pleased to announce 150 Ellis spaces. These are childcare for those children needing intensive support, Mr. Speaker. That brings our number now up to nearly 400 Ellis spaces in the province, Mr. Speaker. Growth that works for everyone.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is that despite these changes and investments, Saskatchewan still has less access to childcare than nearly any other province in Canada. We need a comprehensive action plan, Mr. Speaker. We're nearly 2 years into this agreement, and that government has committed 28,000 spaces. We're far off that mark. There hasn't been enough action, and there isn't a plan. And that plan will only work if it's formulated with the direct involvement of all affected stakeholders, parents, childcare providers, experts, the folks this government committed to working with under Section 5.2.1 of that agreement. When can folks, and I mean all the folks listed in that agreement, count on being meaningfully consulted by this government? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, we're doing just that, Mr. Speaker, by implementing a $1.1 billion agreement over a 5-year time frame, Mr. Speaker. This work is not going to happen overnight, but Mr. Speaker, thanks to the good work of the ministry and many communities across the province, we have been able to announce, Mr. Speaker, just a week ago, 1,599 new spaces in 31 communities across the province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that's on top of the 1,202 spaces that we announced just in March of this year, Mr. Speaker, and that was on top of the 601 spaces that we announced in December of last year, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, we're working on developing things like a wage grid so that those that are working in this sector, Mr. Speaker, can have competitive salaries, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're seeing ECE numbers. ECE 3 numbers in this province is up 10% from just last year, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, that's why we're providing essentially tuition-free education for those that want to get into this sector, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the biggest stumbling block to getting this right is the failure to ensure the sector can attract and retain staff. There is a critical shortage of qualified educators and staff. I'm sure the minister knows this. And the biggest barrier is we simply don't pay them enough. Without them, the government can open as many childcare spaces as they want. They can put out as many press releases on new spaces as they want, but those spaces are meaningless if they're not staffed. The solution is straightforward. Early learning and childcare providers are calling for better working conditions and higher wages. Does the minister think that it's okay that the members of the profession that shape all future professions have to work multiple jobs or stop at the food bank after a shift?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, Mr. Speaker, I think that we all are making great improvements on this front, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're up to a $5 per hour wage enhancement, Mr. Speaker, as we're working towards developing an entire wage grid for the sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we provided $9 million in this year's budget for tuition-free training opportunities and training reimbursement top-up grants to support ECEs, Mr. Speaker. We're providing dollars for those childcare centres that need to backfill when their staff leave to go upgrade their training. Mr. Speaker, last year we made an investment in 500 additional childcare training spaces in places like Sask Polytechnic, as well as Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is all a part of the work that we're doing to not only create the spaces, but, Mr. Speaker, but to have the people trained to work in those spaces, Mr. Speaker. Those plans go hand in hand, and they are part of the 5-year plan that we're working with the federal government.
Hear, hear.
Thank you.
Hear, hear. Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, that minister knows full well that many providers were not eligible for that $5 increase. There is a labour crisis, Mr. Speaker. There is just so much at stake here. This is our moment to provide a universal childcare system available to all families, regardless of background, income, or the developmental needs of children. But we need this government to do some heavy lifting. It's not enough for them to be the middleman, taking cash from the feds and distributing it, Mr. Speaker. A real plan would be win, win, win. Proper compensation and acknowledgement of this profession, financial relief for families, and the good start in life that all children deserve. Earlier, we were joined by stakeholders who have not been made part of that conversation. So will the minister commit today that we will not miss this historical opportunity to improve the lives of all Saskatchewan people, but particularly our children, now and into the future?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have been working closely with communities, community-based organizations, Mr. Speaker, organizations like SICA, Mr. Speaker, and others, and the ministry, I think, has done a tremendous job and great amount of work that has been done in less than 2 years since signing the agreement, Mr. Speaker. That's why we have been able to announce 3,400 new childcare spaces, Mr. Speaker. We're doing things like the $500 startup grant to regulated home-based childcare. We've increased the monthly nutritional grant by $20 per month from $60 to $80, Mr. Speaker. $9.7 million over 4 years for new childcare spaces, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said, up to $5 an hour in recognition of the important work that child educators are doing, Mr. Speaker. As well, as I said before, Mr. Speaker, we're essentially paying for the tuition tuition-free education for anybody that wants to not only either get into this sector, Mr. Speaker, or those that are already working in it and want to expand their range in terms of which level that they're at, Mr. Speaker, that will then relate to more dollars in their own pocket. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Mr. Speaker, this Sask Party government has the dubious distinction of overseeing year over year of this province having the worst intimate partner violence rates in the country. Yeah. You know what this Sask Party government also has the dubious distinction of? Responding to that by inviting a convicted wife killer to the legislature and then being internationally shamed into having to apologize.
5 days.
This government is behind other provinces when it comes to supporting survivors. There is so much that they could be doing, and they're making an active choice not to. One of those supports would be to provide operational funding for second-stage shelters. Will the government provide this much-needed funding today? Yes or no?
Hear, 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 hear.
Recognize the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, we have provided millions of dollars to the intervention and prevention services, including most recently funding to Hope Restored, whose focus is trafficking, Mr. Speaker, of vulnerable, primarily young women. It's very unconstructive. To say the least, this undermining of all the positive work that's been done, $25 million in investment, Mr. Speaker, this year by this government in intervention and prevention. You can literally bang your desk every day and demand more funding, even though, interestingly, they didn't commit to any for second-stage housing in the last election or the last two before that. But the issue is where funding, Mr. Speaker, can be best allocated to what organizations and where it complements and wraps around the emergency shelters and rapid response prevention services that are already in place. Mr. Speaker, watch this space.
Hear, hear. Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills.
Number 1, the Honourable Ms. Tell.
Stand.
Ms. Tell.
Stand. Presenting reports by standing in special committees. Before orders of the day. I recognize the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
This is to request leave. Yeah. To request leave, Mr. Speaker, to move a motion to approve and adopt the Constituency Boundaries Commission final report.
It's been requested for a motion. Is leave granted? Leave is not granted. Orders of the day.
8 asked by Ms. Young, Regina University.
Recognize the government whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to order questions 68 and 69.
Questions 68 and 69 have been ordered. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In order to facilitate the ceremony unveiling of the portrait, I move that this House do now adjourn.
Government House Leader has moved to adjourn the House. It is a pleasure to Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. This House now stands adjourned until 10:30 tomorrow morning.